state that I would be having some very hard conversations with my Israeli colleagues about is why the U.S. wasn't informed. We are very engaged. We've been very supportive of Israel, and yet there was no heads up about the pagers. In fact, there appears to have been no strategy. Some of the reporting is that they had decided this was a use it or lose it situation. That's a quote by a former senior Israeli official, and there was no strategy behind it. And that's something I have big questions about. What is the strategy here? As you heard earlier, this idea that somehow they were going to show Hezbollah that they had won this by exploding these pagers, I think is very questionable. To say the least. And it's also a question about the larger strategy with respect to Gaza, because we know U.S. forces have already been put in peril. So Israel needs to bring the United States into the decision making. We've been working overtime to try to have a ceasefire. That has been undermined by Netanyahu again and again and again. And I think we even see within the Israeli government people like the Minister of Defense Gallant questioning what the strategy is here. And now we are hearing reports that he and Netanyahu have a rift. So there is a real question right now as to how we move forward and make sure that this does not devolve. One of the things that scared me about the conversation you just had is a conversation about how could this get worse? It could get a lot worse. And that is my concern right now.
Well, I can hear the concern in your voice, Congresswoman, and we do appreciate your being with us today. I guess my question is, how far are you prepared to go then? This could happen at any moment if something did begin to happen wider between Israel and Hezbollah, if there is a concerted retaliatory strike against Israel that could involve ballistic missiles. What role should we ask our airmen and sailors to play?
Well, that is why we are working so hard to not get to that point. The United States has, during this conflict, moved carriers into the region. We've reached out through our allies to say we will not tolerate those types of attacks on Israel. But again, if we are going to move forward, if we are going to help create regional stability, I think with Israel, we need to understand the strategy, and we need to be brought into that strategy.
Well, of course, as we consider the role the U.S. could play in many of these hypothetical scenarios, in which many of which, of course, the U.S. is actively working to avoid, it does raise the question around military readiness. And this was, in part, a conversation that was being had on Capitol Hill this week, as obviously your chamber shot down a continuing resolution that would have extended for 6 months and raised concern among defense hawks about the impact it could have on the budget of the Pentagon. Now the talk, Congresswoman, is that it will be a 3-month clean continuing resolution. Are you prepared to support that? We do need a clean continuing resolution, and those are the talks right now. And we need to make sure that it doesn't last too long, because here's the problem with continuing resolutions for the DoD. They do not allow for new start programs. So all of the programs that we have been working on over the year that we think are important for the security and readiness of our military will not be started. We also are going to have to stop some programs that can't grow because they don't have next year's appropriations passed. They have to stay at this year's numbers. This all comes at a time as we are looking over our national defense strategy and seeing some real concerns about how we fund the military of the future and where we are investing. We need to be more innovative. We need to figure out how to do this more economically in many cases with off-the-shelf technology. But these conversations will come to a halt if we are simply operating on last year's appropriations.
Well, how about we deal with the matter at hand first, though? In 11 days, is the government going to shut down?
You know, I think from what I am hearing, we are working together to get a continuing resolution passed that will be a clean continuing resolution. I would suspect it will go past this election so we can take it out of some of this partisan atmosphere and really get down to work in the lame duck lame duck session so we can get our appropriations passed before the new year. That is very much what I would like to do. It is a shame that we are in this partisan fight, that the majority continues to put these bills on the floor that are partisan bills. I know that former President Trump has suggested we shut the government down. I very much hope we don't do that. He was the president the last time and the longest time we shut the government down. I think that cost our GDP about $11 billion, according to the CBO. So this is something that's bad for the economy, bad for the country, and certainly bad for all of those people who serve the public in these jobs that will be shut down and they won't be receiving paychecks.
Well, of course, the notion that Republicans should not vote for any continuing resolution that doesn't include election security measures was something we heard from Donald Trump this week. But that is not all, Congresswoman. He also, at a rally in Long Island this week, suggested that he wants to remove the SALT cap, which, yes, we know was put into place during his first administration with the 2017 tax cuts in the first place. But for states like the one you represent, New Jersey, isn't this welcome news?
Where has he been on this? I mean, he implements this in 2017. It's been disastrous for New Jersey. There have been numerous bills that I've worked on to pass through the House that we could not get through the Republican Senate. I have a bill now that I've been promoting. If former President Trump wants to see us getting rid of the state and local tax deduction cap, which I very much want to do, then he has the legislative proposals to do so. I just don't find this sudden change of heart in Long Island at a rally with people who would want to see us getting rid of this cap very credible. He has real actions he could take to get rid of this disastrous plan he put into place, so I would like to see him do that.
But you actually, to Kayleigh's point, you have legislation that would help to restore the SALT deduction. Have you talked to the Trump campaign about this? Will you reach across the aisle and make this work?
I will certainly make a suggestion to them and alert them to my legislation because, look, I am always fighting for New Jerseyans. I put governing ahead of partisan politics. It would be great if Trump would do that. I've not seen it yet.
So you haven't heard from Speaker Johnson on this?
But I'd like to. I've not heard from Speaker Johnson on this. I will reach out to him.